All right, here we are.
Welcome back, Rugmo.
So we've read Book 8, and that's what we're going to talk about today, as well as some other things that are on our minds.
I agree. How is your writing going?
It's going. Last couple of nights I wrote a page each in my little notebook. It's starting to take form. It's starting to look like something other than just words on paper.
like an MC Escher painting. At first, it's a couple lines, then it's a couple staircases, and before you know it, you have a four-dimensional tesseract.
Yeah. It's not even full sizes of paper, too. I think that's worth noting. They're only like 8-inch by 5-inch pieces of paper.
Oh, interesting.
It's just a handy little pocket notebook.
Yeah.
Been doodling and writing it.
One of my favorite writers, Don DeLillo, carried a pocket notebook. I think he put it in his left upper pocket across his chest, so that would make it a pocket protector. And he lives in Manhattan, somewhere around New York City. And wherever he goes, whether it be on a subway, a bus, or he's sitting at home looking out the window at the sprawl of people outside, he's grabbing it out of his chest pocket and taking notes on humanity for his next novel.
That's like a trope in some movies, too. There's always like a Bible in the front chest pocket that takes a bullet for someone, saves their life.
A shield of observations. Speaking of observations, I found in Book 8 a wonderful line about when things appear, take them at first glance and then move on. Don't, in other words, if you come across a little ditch and in that ditch there is someone on their back holding their knee up in the air, you should not stop and ask yourself, maybe they're faking it. Maybe what I'm seeing is a illusion set up by Maya or whatever demon wants to give me a bad day. No, you should say to yourself, all right, I see someone on their back in pain. I should stop and help. And then you can apply that idea of taking things at first glance to anything. If you have a certain feeling, maybe take that feeling at face value instead of trying to introspect it away. Do you remember that section?
Yes, I do. And just like
What did you make of that admonition?
pretty much you just summed up most of it, but just don't read too much into something. But at the same time, don't jump to conclusions. Like, take the proper amount of time to observe it for what it is and then act accordingly. But also don't assume that there's any malicious intent involved. And I think that happens a lot in society today.
Yes, because the evil is across the street, not beating in the human heart. I want to go deeper into that. So this notion of the truth is on the top layer. What does that mean for books in general? Because people love to have book clubs like we're doing now and explain the themes and the hypothetically assumed deep structure of a narrative, what this character or characters really mean, what the plot is trying to tell us and how it relates to society as a whole. Where would the Stoic come in, say, in this book club situation? And if that Stoic were to sit down in a chair in the circle that we're sitting in, and you and I are talking about these sophisticated things like theme and plot and characterization, what would the Stoics say about our enterprise?
I think their conversation might look a lot like Plato's Republic. Have you ever read it?
Yeah, go on. Parts of it.
Well, it's kind of set up like a I don't know, like a speech or something by Socrates, but everyone else in the room is there challenging his ideas and on justice and democracy and things like that. And it's set up in a way where Socrates is able to, shoot everyone down and correct their thoughts at every turn. But in reality, it would look a lot more like everybody shutting everyone else down and forging good ideas with good ideas and sharpening iron with iron, as they would say.
Do you think it would be similar to the Inklings setup? Now, I haven't read about the Inklings and what they did when they met at the tavern or the pub. But would this iron sharpening iron motif that you bring up be similar to the Stoic situation?
Well,
Or different?
we know those conversations happened all the time with the Inklings. Like
All right.
C.S. Lewis converted to Christianity because of conversations with Tolkien.
And what I wouldn't give to be a fly in the corner, or excuse me, what I would give, there would be two things I would not give. To be a fly in the corner, or even a mosquito on the shoulder. What's that cuff that you have on the coats that makes your shoulders look broad? Just to be a mosquito right on that base, to hear what Tolkien would have said, actually have said, looking C.S. Lewis in the face. I wonder if he used illustrations, if he used cold arguments,
I
or
believe
maybe
some
he told jokes.
I believe some of the letters are available online if you can find them.
Oh, okay. I wonder, so that brings me to the topic of evangelism. Is it proper for a Stoic to be evangelical about their philosophy? In other words, I remember a few weeks back you had summarized Stoicism nicely by saying the Stoic puts his or her quote unquote faith in the intelligence of the universe. Well, does it follow then that a Stoic, this tight-lipped, apathetic Stoic, would be an evangelical about spreading the message of the intelligence of the universe? Marcus Aurelius wrote Book VIII. He wrote it for himself, but has there ever been and I know in the philosophy section nowadays you have books called like the New Stoicism, but it's hard to draw the line between what's merely informative. This is what New Stoicism looks like. This is what Stoicism has looked like historically. And then on the other side of the line, and you should practice this form of Stoicism. And this is how it would improve your life. I have yet to find a Stoic who's evangelical.
That's a really good point. No one read Meditations except for Marcus Aurelius during the lifetime of Marcus Aurelius. But the entire, like you could say the most influential writer of Western society would be Apostle Paul, just because he wrote the
Yes.
original like New Testament books and then spread it as far and wide as he possibly could. But with Marcus Aurelius and the other Stoics of history, they always just kept to themselves. And that's a really important integral part of the philosophy, is to not evangelize, as you said, other people into the ideology of Stoicism.
Not to be controversial, but does Christianity work in private? Or can Christianity only exist on a public plane?
That's something I think about a lot. Like when I was like just super atheist in every way, shape, and form, I was like, the only reason religion works at all is because everybody's on the same page and acting the same way. But you put like a Christian and a Muslim and a Jew together, they're going to have a lot of arguments and disagreements.
Yes. And yet I think about the Gospels and some of the teachings of Jesus. I'm not trying to be Jeffersonian and clip out the parts I don't like and take the parts I do like and put them in my own kind of notebook and string together my own preferred sayings of Jesus Christ. But there are certain teachings, certain sayings, certain anecdotes, certain parables that Jesus gives to the crowd that smack of a stoic resolve. For example, when he says, do not worry about tomorrow, worry about now, because tomorrow will take care of itself.
Christian form would be, God will take care of it for you, so don't worry about the future. He's the one in charge.
Indeed. And indeed, where that teaching shows up, to complete the passage, Jesus does say your Father loves you. So that's an overt anthropomorphization of God. But if you stop at worry not about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself, that is pure Stoicism. Like that's 100 proof Stoic teaching. So one is invited to wonder, was Jesus added to? Did the writer Matthew take this teacher who could have been a mere Stoic and appropriate his version of Stoicism for his Jewish purposes, to take this Stoic teacher and align him with the tradition of the rabbis? I'm not here to make those kind of historical arguments, but it is interesting how blurry the line can be. Literally, it's only a clause away in a sentence from a Stoic ideal, worry not for tomorrow, and what we call a typical Christian sentence, because your Father knows what you need before you ask him. When you start to think about that way, you start to see the laboratory of theology and religious text making.
That kind of makes me think of another theory that I've had that's been bouncing around in my head. Going back to like the most influential figures of Western civilization, you could argue that like the two on the top would be, say, Jesus and Socrates. And like a lot of people after Socrates or Jesus have combined the theologies of the two and, you know, gotten the best out of both worlds, and then came like a lot of the ideas of Stoicism from Socrates and from Jesus, you could argue. But neither of those figures ever wrote a single word down. And that's really interesting to me. That's why I think a lot of like anti-theists get the idea that Jesus never existed. And that's a question that I think about all the time, but I don't pretend to be able to find the answer. But that makes me think also, what if Socrates never actually existed as a man? What if the same anti-theorist theory of Jesus just being a character created by Apostle Paul, the same thing could be said about Plato creating the character of Socrates just to get all of his points across? Like, this is how I see the ideal teacher model, so I'm just gonna write about him as if he's a real individual to give us all something to strive for. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. And I would add to this gestalt that we're building in kaleidoscoping outward the Pareto principle, or the Pareto principle. So the idea that in any domain, whether it's the cluster of stars, cell division, or the acquisition of skills and competence, the cream rises to the top, and the cream is a very thin layer. So when you look at Jesus and you look at Socrates, piggybacking off what you said, whether they were actual historical figures or not, meaning rises to the top, and it's as if when you talk about representative figures of humanity, of ideals, of science, philosophy, botany, whatever subject matter you want to look at, the figureheads, the mastheads are always few in number. And I would say, according to the Pareto principle, by necessity. You couldn't have, in other words, 50 great figures of all Western civilization. There would just be too many. Because in that 50 number, or whatever arbitrary number you chose, there would always be number one, after which follows 2, 3, down to 50. Yes, if you subdivide Western civilization, it has its many religions, then it subdivides into its many cults, then it subdivides into many eccentricities that individuals have about flying spaghetti monsters or whatever they believe in on a Tuesday. But when you put all those things together, something necessarily rises at number one. And my point is that number one is and must be arbitrary, because there is no way to prove why Jesus, of all historical figures, should be the masthead of what it means to be a Western individual, a Western human being. You could spend 10 lifetimes trying to make that argument, and you would fail, because there's just too much data, just too much below the top of the pyramid to take into account. So to a Socrates, if you want to call him the secular savior, a man who walked around doubting everything and knew that he knew nothing. So he was himself free from pride, and died similarly as the Messiah of secular culture by drinking the hemlock willingly and not running from society, which nursed him from an infant stage. So if it wasn't Socrates, it could have been Mark Allison. If it wasn't Jesus Christ, it could have been Muhammad Ali. But it began with those two, and time has just used the marketing principle of, hey, they got a good thing going across the street. Let's throw our brand into the mix and it will benefit as a result. So if you want to make Rugmo a monotheistic religion of your own and you want people to follow, your best bet is to take a little bit of the good stuff from Christianity, because a lot of people believe in Christ, and just change names, change situations, but keep it around the ballpark. And when people hit, their faith and energies out of the Christian park, it's bound to land in yours, and your church will grow. So I think that helps explain why Jesus and Socrates have lasted for so long, but it doesn't explain why they were there in the first place. And I think that's where the Pareto principle comes in, although it's not a perfect picture.
I like that.
So then, according to that theory, they're just going to get more famous, but they will change. And at one time, Jesus was just a teacher, not unlike the other zealots when Rome was in power. He wasn't the first to be crucified on a cross for being a zealous teacher of the Torah and of any form of opposition to Roman polity. But then he morphed over time after his death. He became this living figure who returned to his disciples and gave them tongues of fire. Then with Paul, he became this Neoplatonic savior of the body and of the body politic, which would replace the body of the Roman politic. So that's why Paul talks about we are members of one body, literally one polity, not one that is on earth, but one that is being raised in heaven. And then it went through its medieval phase, and then it went through its existential crisis in the 1900s. And now with the internet, it's probably going to go through an incredible scattering of influences. Like if someone really wanted to, they can make Akira The Don lo-fi music stand for the new Christian wave, if they really wanted to.
And you can make it work in a lot of ways.
And Socrates will spring up, even if he only springs up as a counterpoint to the religious right? The Socrates who says, come now, you theological people, where is your transcendence? You have eyes like I do, 2 of them. You have 2 arms like I do, 2 feet. You don't have any wings, neither do I. So why do we prat on about this thing above the clouds? Let's stick to what we know, but that's still in question. So let's sit and talk and ask each other probing questions and be good psychologists or physicists. So let's not just have our Hadron Collider blowing up particles and spending trillions of dollars. Let's have a bunch of debates and long form podcasts and endless conversations to remind ourselves that we are much less and much more than we think we are. And both models will work. And in fact, I think true excitement in life will be found in bouncing back and forth between the two, especially when you find an interlocutor like you and I and everyone else in Book Wave, considering our last two episodes. I think we found a way to bounce back and forth like a game of ping pong between the secular and the sacred.
Yeah, I think the only way to talk about religion and theology and belief systems is to be open to the fact that you're completely wrong about everything. And you take everyone else's arguments like they're wrong about everything, and then just throw it all on the table and actually really dive deep into it and find out what's going to make you a better person and what's going to better affect society without causing too many disruptions in society and collapsing too many people's belief systems, because we know where that leads.
Yes. It's not a good thing when you have 50,000 wrenches from people on Twitter or another social media platform being tossed through the glass window of your belief system. Not good. Makes you want to go outside and be an anarchist.
They're throwing wrenches, like you said, but if they just threw a screwdriver, maybe you could fit another piece into place.
Beautiful. Yes. They should knock on the door like a good neighbor and say, hey, I've listened to you. It sounds like you don't have this important tool. Just saying. And then they walk away and you hold the screwdriver in your hand and you think, maybe that I do have some loose bolts inside my thinking. One thing the Stoic has against them is pride. So we talked about the Stoic having a private religion, let's say, because believing in the intelligence of the universe is very close to having a proxy for God. And believing that the universe is all flow and everything will find its proper place and time. And so you don't have to worry about anything that is outside of your immediate grasp. That very much sounds like faith. With that said, since they're not proselytizing others, but they're meditating to themselves, when they do walk out their door and look at the world around them, there is this incredible opportunity to look in derision and scorn at people who haven't yet found the secret sauce of meditation. So in some ways, if the Stoic is not careful, the Stoic will become the new Pharisee of secular movements, of secular belief, of secular philosophy. And it's difficult to pin down a Stoic Pharisee because it's not as if they're going out proselytizing. You just notice it when you talk to them. If they think they're above the conversation, well, I'm a Stoic. I know how things are going to turn out, so there's really no point in debating anything.
And then you have to draw the line of like what's a Stoic and what's just a pretender of Stoicism. And you have the debate nowadays between like, oh, you're a Christian, but you're not a real Christian.
Indeed, it's a weird obsession people have. They want to go beyond the appearance. Oh, you say you're a Stoic, prove it. Oh, you say you're a Christian, what brand?
Yeah, are you a Calvinist? Are you a Lutheran or what?
Exactly. Oh, you're a secular humanist? What a cop-out. That doesn't mean anything. Well, why doesn't it mean anything? Carl Sagan existed. How come you can't just point to Carl Sagan and be like, you know what? I'm striving for that kind of understanding, et cetera, et cetera. But no, people want to call others out. And I think one reason for that calling out is insecurity in their own position. Because the truth is, like you and I have pointed out throughout this, and I think this is the pattern emerging, whether you're in the sacred camp or the secular camp, both are on shifting sand. And that's not a bad thing, because if you did have a proper foundation that wouldn't tremble in an earthquake, then you have something fit for angels, and it's probably the dimensions of a cloud, and not therefore something you can rely on as a human being. It just doesn't have that existential validity to it. When you have I live in California. When we have earthquakes, the building is meant to move. If it doesn't move, the ground will break apart, because the ground, the foundation, is not built in such a way as to adapt to that shifting tectonic activity. Buildings that try to run against the current of what nature's doing suffer the consequences of their being out of place. So too with ideologies and philosophies. If they're not built to go with the flow of the changing environment, they will stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, I like that.
So when people try to pin down what a man is and what a woman is and how the man and the woman should be in relation, they can trip over the same foot. What a woman is, nobody can answer. What a man is, nobody can answer. Because the problem in the formulation is the copula, is. The moment you say something is, you've taken a still shot photo. And that's all it can be now. You take an x-ray of someone's lungs and you look at it. That's all it can be now, but that's laughable. You're looking at that little thing you put up against the light background and you see the gray structure called your lungs and the black around it. And what you're doing is you're looking for something. And if you find nothing, then you're in a good situation. But to then 2 years later, even a month later, hell, a week later, if you were to look at that person's chest, just man to man, and say to yourself, I know exactly what's going on underneath the skin because I've looked at the picture, you'd be crazy, because physiology changes people. There might be something growing. There might be something decaying. Who knows what's going on? You just breathed in some dust, so that's going to affect things. So the problem is in saying that things are or that something is. So when you look at a woman, a 12-year-old woman versus a 45-year-old woman is completely different. So too with a man. A 6-year-old man and a 55-year-old man are completely different, physiologically, hormonally, not to mention what they've learned along the way, studies they've taken, friends they've made, lovers they've lost. A person is so idiosyncratic by the time they turn 30, it's unbelievable. They're a walking maze. So that whole debate about gender roles, I think it's important to talk about because it raises awareness of shifting sands, but to pin a biology down, I think is short-sighted. It's myopic. If we would have pinned down the human organism 100 years ago, we would have missed out on the discovery of the cell, of photosynthesis, of everything that makes the heart beat. And I think so too, it'll turn out psychologically and culturally with the woman and with the man. And I was just talking to my dad about this last night, about marriage as an institution. So nowadays we see a lot of people opting out of marriage, and that may not be a bad thing. It may be bad for some people. It may be good for others. But this idea of being with one person for 50 plus years in a world where most people can't afford a house, most people are going to go through so many job changes, it would rack your brain, where you have to move often, long hours, or not enough hours. The idea of being with one person for 50 plus years and trying to make that work, and all the confusion and sifting sand, it might just be necessary to have more of a cohabitation or even polyamorous setup. I went off on a tangent, and I apologize.
No, man, I love listening to you. Some really good metaphors in there.
So people that worry about, oh, I'm not married yet, I don't think they have reason to worry. So the Stoic would say, look at the culture. Most people aren't getting married. There's reason for that. If the group is doing it, it must be according to nature. Now, that's not always true. It wasn't true with the Soviet Russia and the USSR, but there might be something to this decentralization of all normalcy.
I think in this, the intelligence of the universe has something to do with population control. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I think something's happening.
Yes.
I don't know why it's not happening in India, but I think there's a reason it's happening in North America, that people aren't having as many children.
I look at the United States and I think of the tremendous debt millennials have on their backs. It's up in the trillions now, student debt. It's a true crisis. So you saddle the current generation, the generation that's supposed to be finding wives or husbands and settling down with a family. If we want to buy into that ideology of this is what it means to be an American. You get a good job, you find a wife, you raise good, nice citizens, and then you sleep on your pension by the time you're 65. Well, none of that's going to happen because every single male and female has probably 40 to 80 grand of debt to begin with. And that debt can never be defaulted on as a federal government loan. It gains in interest every single month from its principal. And we all know that because everyone gets a college degree, because everyone got the loans to go to college, there is an oversaturation of every major except for maybe the STEMs, engineering, science, etc.
Yeah, I was watching the
yep.
Joe Rogan podcast with
yeah.
Andrew Yang, I think his name is.
Yeah, I watched it too.
Yeah, and he said one part where he was talking about if you take the average person and give them a whole bunch of debt and tell them you're not going to be able to pay your bills next week or next month, then their IQ dramatically drops and they'll do a lot less on that IQ test than if they had been in a more comfortable financial situation. So financial stress actually degrades your IQ.
Yeah. Yep. I remember that. So you apply that, you extrapolate that finding to daily life. You're sitting at a bar, you see a pretty girl, and you think, all right, here's my chance. In the back of your mind, you know, all right, student loans got to be paid in 2 weeks. I don't have the money. I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Here's a pretty girl. Here's an opportunity to make my life richer, fuller. You sit down with her and you begin to speak in tongues and spaghetti soup all over the table. She can't follow what you're trying to ask from her and kind of gives you the silent treatment. Well, perhaps 10% of that awkwardness was due to all the baggage you have in your subconscious, namely your bills and your big hanging sword of Damocles over your head, that is your student debt. Now, if the man and the woman were honest with one another at the bar, they would probably discover, oh, you have debt too? So do I. And they'd be able to laugh it off together, and their IQs would collectively raise at that moment like hit points. And they'd probably have a better experience as if they were playing the game The Sims, and they'd jump up and down and run out of the bar together. But so many people aren't as open and transparent with one another as they could be.
Yeah, that's a big factor right there. Like, everyone is in debt, and yet we try to hide the fact that we are in any lesser social tier than anybody else.
Exactly. We want to pretend that we're our parents already, and we're not. Like, our parents went through a different time, a different generation. They could look forward to a nice corporate job for 50 years. They'd move up the ladder, they'd get a good retirement package, and they'd have their house and boat. Not all, obviously, I'm using a stereotype only to prove the point and push out the exception. Nowadays, you're going to have 5, 6 jobs. They're going to be different, and they're not going to be for the same company. And you're going to have to also think about personal brand, no matter who you are. And if you were to try to tell certain baby boomers that, they'd be like, they wouldn't know how to connect the dots because it is very disparate and decentralized.
Look at the average baby boomer. Most of them have only had 1 or 2 jobs their entire life.
Yes, yes. And I don't want to stress the point of marriage. It's just an easy one to look at. I want to move to religion. So so like marriage failing, when you have a projection of your future as well, I'm gonna have 5 or 6 different jobs with different companies in different states, probably, if I'm lucky. And I'm gonna have to think about a personal brand, which means I'm gonna have to work off the clock on separate streams of revenue, like a website or whatever. A marriage is going to be difficult. I might not be able to afford a Netflix account, let alone a wedding ring. Now you throw in a religion. How can you expect a person in this environment and climate to commit to one dogma for 50 years when they go through 5 different bosses, employers, skills? Every time you learn a new skill, it changes the way you look at the world, right? If you learn how to be a carpenter, it's going to change the way you look at trees. If you learn how to read a new language, it's going to change the way you use your own language because you have a sense of the relativism of your form of speech.
And there's so many different options
yeah.
too. Like there's so many different
options,
ways you can split that up and differentiate it. Like just for example, I have 2 good friends that have both recently just got engaged, and they're going 2 completely different routes. Like my one buddy is throwing this huge wedding, like over 100 people are gonna be there, and they're doing the whole like test the cake, test the food, and all these other plans for their huge celebration, going on a big trip. And my other friend is just like, yeah, we're just gonna go down to the town hall one of these days and sign the paperwork and get it all figured out, and then we'll be married.
I love it. The second one's my hero. That's what I would do if I could. Oh. What do you make of that?
I don't really know. It just works differently for different people.
So I would take your analogy and I would apply it directly to, let's call it the aesthetics of the transcendent. So you're going through these proverbial 5 or 6 jobs in your lifetime. You're learning all these new skills and reading all these new writers. And I don't mean just books, but I mean listening to different podcasts, watching different clips on YouTube that expose you to so many different streams of consciousness. Now you think to yourself, okay, I want to unify these things somehow to give myself orientation. An orientation preferably to the truth, to beauty, and to love. What am I going to trust to get me there? Am I going to trust Christianity? And you look at your local churches and you say, well, probably not. They seem kind of provincial. Am I going to trust what my buddy says across the street? Well, not really, because he's the sort of guy that's just going to go and sign the paperwork, metaphorically speaking. I don't think he has a lot to tell me on a universal basis, even though it's working out for him. You look at another person who has a lot of money to spend, and so they can afford to make a lot of mistakes. So when they give you advice, you think to yourself, yeah, I think I'm outside of their bracket to accept the advice. Then you face the problem of what will I trust to align everything I know and probably will find out in the future to bring me closer and closer to the truth, beauty, and love? What do you think people are going to use to bring them to those 3 things as these years unfold?
I think you just have to find it in community and self-reflection.
It is that harmony of the 2. On Twitter, Akira The Don posted a link to, I think his name is John Hamilton. I might have mispronounced his last name. He's a public thinker who wrote an article in the Medium space. It's an online syndication about what he calls the blue church, which he uses to refer to the old way of communicating to large groups. So his meme for that, or shorthand, is broadcast television. And he fundamentally believes that broadcast television, as a form of communicating to the masses stemmed from World War II and the needs that arose from being involved with war. Now we've moved past that because the war is over. Europe is rebuilt. We're, again, as Americans, and maybe as Canadians, certainly as Canadians, if you look at the East and the West, and if you take Jordan Peterson as a meme of the internal conflict of we can't even get our words straight and how to refer to another person. We're trying to find ourselves again, and we're wandering in the forest of multiple identities. So what will replace the blue church in communicating to the masses? And the reason I bring up this particular thinker is he said, the paradigm of communicating to the masses is all wrong. It's a false step nowadays. You don't want to think of yourself as a communicator to the masses. You want to think of yourself, and I'm going to quote my good friend who's a great philosopher. His name is Rugm0, who said, we are nodes in a network. And that changes the ballgame of dialogue. Because now it's no longer, how can I find a platform and a sufficiently amplified microphone to say what I have to say to as many people as possible so that they all get the same message? That's what you did in the 90s. Walter Cronkite, anchors, etc. Nowadays, it's, all right, where am I right now? What's my situation? And how many nodes are there around me? With that knowledge, which is something like a tactile sense, what should I say? Or what can I say? Or what, and to use Jordan Peterson's formulation, in this given moment with these particular nodes, what is the truth that I have to tell? And then you formulate it in speech. And then you, to quote again, Jordan Peterson, you see what happens, how the other members of the node in your proximal vicinity react and are affected by that news. We might even say it's good news. And then they can distribute it outside your particular niche to other networks, but they'll do it in such a way that it is now informed by their truth, their speech patterns, their view on the network. And so it's this constant reinforcement, but evolution that not only ripples across the network, but changes the shape of the network, which now comes back to and doubles back on changing every possible speech pattern that the individual nodes can possess. That's really exciting to me because it decentralizes all forms of knowing and truth speaking and kind of throws it up into the air at every given instant. And so you have to be so vigilant and so aware of where you are at this moment. So that's where the Stoic comes in, and as the Stoic has something valuable to teach.
We're in the middle of a reconstruction of the distribution of information and ideas.
Correct.
Until now, we've lived in a format of just top-down. You have certain people telling everybody else what they think and how to think. And now we've reached a point where all those people, the only thing left of them is the literature. So we can go back to that.
Ooh, I like what you did with that.
And use the literature. And there's so much out there that not one person is going to be able to read everything, right? So everyone's going to have a different mindset and a different toolkit to formulate through these ideas and processes. So instead of just taking it from the philosophers and the news outlets and the church to just tell us what they think, for the first time, everyone in modern civilization has the ability to read through it all, go through all this stuff, form their own little groups, and go forward with their ideas, and make use of that network instead of just the top-down formulation.
God, that'd be a good title for this particular video. The network versus top-down formulations or formations, or however you want to say it. That was nice. I like that dichotomy. the I don't remember when President Obama was in the White House. It was a very fuzzy time for me. I thought he was an eloquent speaker, good and noble man, but I always felt, he's above me. Everything around him is above me. I'm just, I just got to get by, work for somebody, keep my head down. Whenever he speaks, I need to listen. And then Trump won. And I remember the night when he won. None of the news anchors wanted to say it. They couldn't believe it. They were rubbing their foreheads. And I called my dad. And I'm not a supporter of Trump as a person, let's say, being in the White House. But I remember saying to my dad, this is incredible. He didn't win. I won. There's hope for me now. Because I didn't know how to articulate it then. But I realized somehow with Trump becoming president, or someone like with Trump becoming president, now anybody can become president.
Yeah, it was like an individual beating out a corporation.
Exactly.
And let's
and
be honest, Hillary Clinton is just the face of a corporation. She's a living, breathing corporation.
Precisely. So if he would not have won, nobody would care about politics because no one would feel that they have skin in the game. They would have felt like they are peons in a system where there are a few people, a few elite people who get to have an opinion that matters. But when Trump became president, suddenly it's, oh, my life now can have meaning. I can win on my own terms. I can go forward with my own dream. And it was so awesome that there's no going back in a good way. Like the world has seen, okay, all right, technology has changed everything. Little groups can become great groups. There's nothing holding them back anymore because nobody has enough curtains to hide their goods. Like Jesus said, whatever you whisper in your neighbor's ear will be shouted from the rooftop. There is no hiding anymore. So there can't be a presumption of, oh, that person is better than me, because everything is revealed. So no one is better than another. We're equal. Now, in terms of quality, I mean, certain books like Dostoevsky can knock you back in your chair and present the sublime, and other books don't do that. But anybody with the English language or whatever language they have, even if they don't have the English language or a language, they might be able to communicate with sign language or drama or by moving their arms. Whatever conveys an idea that another person picks up on, how is that not the same thing as telling a story in pages? So I look at some autistic people, and I really have a soft spot for autism. I don't know why, but I just really do. It's something that
I feel the same way,
about.
man. When I was in public school, my best friend was an autistic kid.
Yeah. So like when I look at like an autistic person and they're communicating. They're not doing something less than communication. It's not like you're looking at a dog with one leg instead of four. You're not looking at some person who's blind in one eye. You're not looking at some maladaptive feature of humanity. You're looking at a form of communication that isn't less than. It just has to be understood. That's all.
It's just incredibly unique.
Yes. And there's so much information packed into what they're doing when they communicate that it is hard to pick up on. Just like people had to go through a learning curve in picking up the English alphabet and the phonemes and the syntax. And you and I, if we walked into China right now, we would be more or less autistic in comparison to a regular Chinese Joe on the street, because we wouldn't know how to communicate in their language. We would just flail our arms around and point at things. Like it would be the same. It would be a humbling experience. So too, with everything going on in their minds and all their receptivity to the environment around them, they take it all in at once, and then they give it back to you faithfully as they experience it. I mean, what more could you ask for from a communicating individual? we do ourselves the disservice in the dialogue with an autistic person by writing it off as subpar, substandard, maladaptive behavior, or something that needs to be calmed down.
Yeah,
We
we apply our own limitations and expectations to other people. And
Great way to say it.
I think that's where people that are on the spectrum have the hardest time communicating with people, is because they're already facing a wall of the other person thinking, okay, this guy's blank, and I can only talk to him in a certain way, so I better lower my cognitive function just so I can be on the same level of this guy, but that really has nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
It's just a completely different way of communication and interacting with the world.
Like I remember when I was next to an autistic person, I was just trying to be present with the individual. And I just wanted to see, what they were there to show me. And just as if right now, just like right now, I'm here to hear what you have to tell me. And I didn't pick up on everything, but I saw some things that I just thought to myself, God, that's beautiful. There's such an appreciation for the world as a tactile, living organism. I mean, things to touch, things to taste, things to look at, things to see, and just the dynamic movement of the environment. Like there was so much that was communicated with that individual that people who, like to have their fork on the right side of the plate and their spoon on the left miss out on.
Yeah, like how do we differentiate as a people like OCD and autism and every Down syndrome? Like what really is that?
A lot of it has to do with insurance companies. So it's taxonomized for profit and for easy categorization in a hospital. So I see its purpose, its utility, let's say. But outside of having to cure diseases and calm people down who are a danger to themselves or others, I don't think the distinction between OCD and whatever is helpful. Because when you look at a person, you don't want to look at them as someone with OCD or someone with autism or someone with bipolar or this or that or the other thing. You want to look at them as, okay, here's an individual in front of me right now. Are they telling me something? If they are, what are they telling me?
Exactly.
Like it's so much simpler that way because you pay them the dignity of another consciousness. It's what Jesus said: worry not about tomorrow. Worry not about the future of the autistic spectrum. Worry about, hey, they're looking at you. That means they probably have something to say.
And
Maybe
it
they want
doesn't
some
matter,
food.
and it doesn't matter who they are or what they believe. They know something you don't. It doesn't matter how they
Yes.
think.
Yes.
They know something that you don't. If you talk to them long enough, you're going to learn something. That's another piece.
Exactly.
That's another piece of the intelligence of the universe, no matter what form it takes. It's a rational being that sits in front of me.
A blind person has a point of view. Someone who cannot taste still has an opinion on food. Someone who cannot walk can tell you what they think about running and how to run well. Someone who has never learned how to dance may still want to try, and someone who's never written a novel can still offer their judgment on the merits of a novel they've read. So, too, someone with autism, OCD, bipolarism, someone who has a learning disability, nevertheless has a point of view that is unique. And so they have a right to voice that point of view on everything: politics, gender equality. Like, why don't we ask someone with bipolar their view on gender equality? Now, don't frame it as, oh, this is someone with bipolarism's opinion. That would be wrong. You're treating the person as a subhuman when you do that. But never count someone out because of something like that. And I think the publishing industry is starting to evolve in that direction. I think in one way they misstep when they say, oh, this is a beautiful book written by a person who has ADD. I feel like they shouldn't have to say the person has ADD.
Yeah,
That
my favorite when it comes to that is like, oh, this was written by a person of color.
Yeah,
Like that makes a difference.
indeed. I mean, at worst, it's just there to sell books or to win awards. But at best, perhaps it's there to let people know, to signal to other people, hey, we're trying to publish everybody because we believe everybody has a point of view. And I agree with that spirit behind the edition. But once we reach a critical mass of everybody with everything publishes something somehow, even if it's not written form, but makes a podcast or something like that, then we'll get past having to label everything because it will just be assumed everybody has everything. And therefore everyone's entitled to the expression of their point of view, which takes us back to the network and nodes.
Yeah, it's like liberalism just got derailed. We got lazy and complacent as a people,
Yes,
and we just
indeed.
stopped trying. We're like, hey, we made it. We made human civilization. Look at that. The Industrial Revolution succeeded. I can sit on my ass and watch television, go to work, and come back home and sit on my ass and watch television. This is life now.
Exactly. And anybody who takes that away is a communist, or, and you just use easy labels to define those who are outside the wall. Yep.
Yep. On one side of the aisle, all they see is Nazis, and on the other side of the aisle, all they see is communists.
Indeed. But with conversations like this, Rugmo, we're getting past that and we're starting to do the all-important synthesis work.
Beautiful.
So thank you for your time. You have the last word, my friend.
I think that's a beautiful way to end it.
Well, Rugmo, the force be with you.
And also with you.
Thanks, man. See ya.